America has a serious ignorance problem. I love America, but with Trump being president and him still having a 40% approval rating, this truth is just undeniable. Now, we are most definitely not the only nation in the world with a significant portion of our population that is ignorant, but it sure feels like when it comes to developed nations, we have more than our share. In this video, I'd like to explore some possibilities as to why that might be if true. We're going to look at historical context, but also look at systematic influences and failures that may be uniquely American. Now, this is going to be a pretty controversial topic, I am sure, and there will be a lot of unpopular opinions being thrown around here, but let's do this, why not? Let's get into the historical context first, as without historical context, things can be more confusing. Some of America's earliest settlers were English pilgrims. These pilgrims came to a land far from their home where nothing was much known of it. These pilgrims probably only had a vague idea of what the climate would be like in America, and more than likely had no idea of the vegetation and biodiversity that was here. They moved to America purely on faith. Faith that the new world was going to be a better life for them, and that they would survive on their own, living a self-sufficient lifestyle. Now to some, that might sound very heroic and brave, but to many, that could also sound very idiotic. You are risking your own life and your family's lives in taking part of such a venture. And when you look at the struggles and when you look at the survival rates, you could be forgiven for saying it was very idiotic. Of the 102 passengers on the Mayflower, 45 did not survive the first year in America. That's a little over a 44% death rate. And it's not like even if you survived, you were sipping rum and eating grapes on the beaches of Cape Cod or something. Life was grueling and hard for the survivors. You were constantly fighting off starvation, and work was never ending. Much of the work that had to be done was a matter of survival. You could not casually do it. It had to be done quickly with the change of seasons in mind. Work your fingers to the bone or die. Now you could say, well, they didn't know it was going to be like this when they embarked on this adventure, but that's exactly it. That's exactly what ignorance is. Completely unaware of the reality and making decisions based off of assumptions and false claims. It gets even more baffling as to why they would make this journey when you start looking into their motivation for crossing the bond to the New World. The Pilgrims were part of a separatist movement in the Church of England. To be clear, they were not Catholics. Everyone knows how there was a big split in England, and Catholics and Anglicans were making life very hard for each other. They were another splitting faction. In essence, a splitting faction out of a splitting faction. In the end of the day, you have to be very intolerant of others and their beliefs to be a Mayflower pilgrim. It's not like their fellow Christians are worshiping a different Messiah or reading a different Bible or something. The Church of England and its pilgrims worshiped the same Jesus, and their Bibles came from the same sources. On the big picture of things, the pilgrims would probably have found more things that they agree with the Church of England than things they disagree with. It's not like they were in an Asian or Islamic nation here. And even if they were, a normal, tolerant person would probably be able to adapt into a different culture and live out a happy life. But not these guys. These guys could not in any attempt look past their quarrels with their fellow countrymen and neighbors, and they had to leave or were forced to leave. If they were forced to leave, it was likely because of their intolerance and inability to be good neighbors, if you ask me. So anyways, these people leave England to move to Holland at first. Faced with the realization that their children will grow up to be Dutch and not English, they decided to set off for the New World to start their own settlement. I mean, clearly these people were very intolerant, stubborn, and fairly ignorant people. But in America, we romanticize their story, and we portray them as brave, heroic beings. I mean, there's something good to be said about virtue and ambition, but come on. I should note that their settlement was arguably not even a success. In the end, they became overshadowed by the Puritans, who were members of the Church of England to the north in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and ultimately conformed to their way of doing things and their beliefs. The story of the Pilgrims is a snapshot of the type of people that came to America to settle in the early days of colonization. Long before the USA was a hegemonic power and was fairly unexplored, you had to be a different kind of person to move to America. Some people would say you had to be adventurous, but that should go without saying. You have to be adventurous to go anywhere. I wouldn't say a European going to Asia is any less adventurous than one going to North America, but at least the one going to Asia knows that there is a huge economy and trade in Asia and can easily find work with the East India Company or something. To be an American, you had to be a misfit. You had to have a desire to leave the society you were in and get as far away from it as possible. A large plot of land with nothing on it far away from your nearest neighbor sounded really good to you. Good enough that you were willing to risk your life for it. Now, we owe everything to these early immigrants. Without them, America would not be America. And this is where we can start talking about systematic and societal influences. These people made up the core of the American non-native populace, and they would continue doing so right up to the 19th century and arguably during the 19th century as well. So American values were based on these people. The freedom to practice any religion, to say what you want without fear of prosecution, are inheritedly direct from these settlers. Now, as an American, I strongly believe that the right to free speech and the right to believe whatever you want are inherent human rights. But where in many nations those are rights executed responsibly, here in America they are culturally foundational and exercised in a harmful way not seen on a comparable level in the West. For example, in the UK, if you called the Queen a pedophile, antichrist bitch, I think many of your countrymen would look at you with some disgust. But here in America, it's completely normal and even somewhat encouraged to call the head of state by names and accuse them of anything imaginable, from pedophilia to Satan's devil spawn. In truth, in America, you have a right to be ignorant and say ignorant shit. It's not only okay, but in many ways, American values encourage it. In America, we embrace individualism and promote ambition. And those are good things. But what ends up happening is we end up empowering all individuals. And some of those individuals are taking their empowerment a little too far. Empowering intellectual freedom and ambition is absolutely an amazing thing. But what we are missing here in America is a sense of intellectual responsibility. Just because you can believe something doesn't mean you should. You have a responsibility to yourself and others to be able to justify what you believe in, and not just think because it's what's in your heart that it's okay to succumb to it. What feels right can sometimes be far from right, and even very harmful. Girls that like the bad boys, white people that fear black people, that time you floored it to beat the red light. All these things may feel impulsively right but are not. There is something emotional inside of you that says this is right, while ignoring the truth that it's not. You are being emotional and not intellectually responsible. Now there's a time and place to be emotional and to sidetrack intellectual thought. That's what art is. You don't need to explain why art is good, why that song sounds good, or why that painting appeals to you. But there's also a time when emotion needs to be disregarded in matters of justice, for example. It doesn't matter if you feel like that man did something wrong. You need evidence that proves he did something wrong before carrying out justice on him, which is why a good justice system is an evidence-based justice system. Another place where emotions should not be tapped into is governance. Much like justice being served, decisions made in governance has profound and deep effects on people's lives and well-being. Therefore, you owe it to everyone to make your decisions based on credible and sound evidence. Your emotions should not dictate your beliefs, especially in matters of government. In America, we fail our children in teaching them logical reasoning and how to avoid logical fallacies, things that are extremely important in a democracy. You would think in a democracy that we would teach these things at a very elementary age and explain that diligence in executing logical reasoning is very important for a healthy, successful, and happy life. But we don't. Instead, we often do the opposite. We fill their heads with nonsense and preconceived biased notions. Tell them not to listen to anyone else that says it's not true, like Obama wants to kill grandma and Muslims want to kill you. Or the most endearing one, if the good Lord, fill in the blanks from there, The good Lord has nothing to do with the state of affairs you or the society is in. This to me is a form of child mental abuse. The child will grow up with no real understanding of logical reasoning. Why did the levee break? It must be the good Lord's will. No, there's a reason why the levee broke. Either your government did a poor job maintaining it, or someone else messed up somewhere. Thoughts and prayers are not solutions to problems. And problems are not manifested by some supreme being, and the true cause of those problems can often be discovered. Aside from religion-related fallacies, there also seems to be this self-empowerment that everyone is an expert on everything. It takes years of practice and study to master a particular skill or knowledge set, and studying using false sources does not count. Yet Americans are extremely quick to think they have a good grasp of very complicated subjects that they spent very little time working with or studying in a truthful way. Everyone is an expert and is quick to undermine true expert opinions. If something that an expert says doesn't make sense to you, it's not because they are lying to you, it's because you are not an expert. Therefore, much of what he or she will say will be over your head. Most Americans will become an expert in at least one thing over the course of their lives, and will become extremely frustrated when people who know very little about that field try to argue with them on it. Yet they themselves fail to see the irony of when they do it to others. It is true that appeal to authority itself can be a logical fallacy. However, an expert's opinion outweighs a non-expert's opinion. Direct evidence is preferred over expert testimony in any case. But it is foolish to think expert consciousness is wrong when you yourself are not an expert in that field. If I was a non-expert with evidence that a vast portion of experts in the field are wrong, I would proceed with extreme caution and highly scrutinize what it is I perceive as direct evidence that they are wrong before scrutinizing the experts themselves. What we see a lot of, however, is someone with a hypothesis who seeks anything that may be evidence to support that hypothesis, while disregarding any evidence to the contrary. This is more emotional-based logic. I feel X is correct, therefore any evidence that supports X is good, and any evidence against it is bad evidence. The end goal should be to get to the truth, not advance a personal agenda. I think we could do a better job in America of teaching our youth and even adults about logical fallacies and how to be intellectually responsible. I think if we did, we'd be much better off on all levels. We don't need to dispose of our values, but rather find ways to achieve our values in a more honest and grounded in reality way, ultimately creating a truer and more solid form of our values. Writing this piece made me want to do my next video on logical fallacies specifically, what they are and how they are used. So stay tuned and please subscribe if you are interested.